Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Jake Broke, and if you've been following the headlines lately, you've probably noticed that the situation in Iran is getting a whole lot messier than the Trump administration ever bargained for. And here's the thing, you don't have to guess or read between the lines. All you need to do is line up the official statements from the White House itself, compare them week by week, and the shift becomes crystal clear. Just a little over a week ago, the headlines were buzzing with excitement. The United Kingdom was getting ready to deploy aircraft carriers into the Middle East to back up the US operation, or at least to stand by in case things heated up. At that moment, the Trump team was crystal clear. They didn't want the UK anywhere near this fight. Why? Because they saw British involvement as stealing the spotlight from America. President Trump himself put it bluntly. He said the Brits always love showing up to wars once the hard part is already over and the victory parade is about to start. He doubled down, insisting the United States had the situation completely under control and that this conflict in Iran was basically wrapped up. We've already won. The message was loud and clear. But fast forward to today, and the story has done a complete 180. Instead of pushing the UK away, Donald Trump is now publicly calling them out, along with NATO allies and even China, for not sending those very same aircraft carriers fast enough. He's openly asking these countries to step up and help keep the Strait of Hormuz open and secure. The same man who
I don't need your aircraft carriers after we've already won. So, those things are very disappointing. And you have to remember, we have 45,000 troops in Japan. We have 45,000 troops in South Korea. We have 45,000, 50,000 troops in Germany. We defend all these countries. And then, do you have any minesweepers? And they say, well, would it be possible for us not to get involved? I've been saying it for a long time.
To brag that America didn't need any help is suddenly pointing fingers at everyone else for dragging their feet. In the span of barely 1 to 2 weeks, we've watched a total mindset flip inside the very same administration. We went from sky-high confidence, the war is already won, to a growing sense of urgency and blame shifting. If this thing spirals into a bigger crisis than they planned, it looks like the strategy is to make sure the blame lands on Europe, the UK, or China, anyone except the decision makers who started it. This isn't just a random mood swing. It's a red flag. And it mirrors something we saw play out almost exactly the same way last year. This shift isn't happening in a vacuum. It's a bright red flag waving right in front of us, and honestly, it mirrors something we witnessed almost beat for beat just last year during the opening round of strikes against Iran's nuclear program. Let's rewind to 2025 for a second. When the United States launched those high-precision bombings on Iran's nuclear facilities, the Trump administration wasted zero time claiming total and absolute victory. They stood at the podium and declared that Iran's entire nuclear program had been completely obliterated, wiped off the map, game over. In fact, the White House itself released an official article that basically said, anyone who tells you otherwise is spreading straight-up fake news. They were that confident, that definitive. Fast forward to 2026, barely a year later, and the story has flipped in the most telling way possible. Here we are again. The Trump administration is back at the negotiating table with Iran over their nuclear program and dropping bombs once more to try and take it out. None of that would even be necessary if the 2025 strikes had truly delivered the knockout blow they bragged about. This isn't a one-off mistake. It's a clear pattern, a signature move from this administration when it comes to Iran. They've been incredibly quick to rush out the good news, the victory headlines, the mission accomplished moments, even when the reality on the ground, proven by their own later actions, tells a very different story. They paint this picture of overwhelming success for the cameras, but then their follow-up decisions quietly admit that things aren't quite as wrapped up as they claimed. And that brings us to the bigger question we all need to wrestle with right now. What is actually happening on the ground in Iran? What's the realistic endgame for this conflict? How long could it really drag on? And is it possible this turns into something far bigger and messier than anyone in Washington is willing to admit? Or are we all just overreacting? Look, conversations like this get complicated fast, especially when Donald Trump is at the center of it. The American media landscape isn't exactly built to help us see clearly. Roughly half the outlets are wired to cheer everything he does, no questions asked. The other half is wired to criticize everything he does, also no questions asked. So on one side you get the "this is the greatest military triumph in history" spin, even if the facts don't fully support it. On the other side you get the "this is already a total disaster" spin, even if that's exaggerated too. What we actually want, what you deserve, is the truth, not the spin. But in today's hyper-polarized media environment, cutting through the noise on your own is incredibly tough. That's exactly why I want to introduce a tool that's become my secret weapon for staying objective in a world drowning in spin. And that tool is Ground News, a longtime sponsor of this channel, and honestly one of the smartest ways I've found to cut through the noise. Here's how it works. For any major story like this, war in Iran, Ground News pulls together hundreds of articles from every corner of the political spectrum and puts them all in one clean dashboard. You can instantly see how left-leaning outlets, right-leaning outlets, and centrist sources are covering the exact same event. It even flags each source's known bias rating, their factual accuracy track record, and who's actually funding them. That last part is huge because it often explains why certain narratives keep getting pushed. My favorite feature? The bias summary at the top of every topic. It reads way more articles than any single person could in a day and instantly shows you the competing storylines, the victory parade narrative versus the total disaster narrative, before you even click a single link. It's like having a team of fact-checkers working 24/7, so you don't have to. And because Ground News is sponsoring today's video, you can actually get 40% off their Vantage plan, the exact same plan I use to unlock all the deep dive features. Just head over to ground.news.pol or scan the QR code that's popping up on screen right now. Huge thanks to Ground News for helping us all see the full picture instead of just the loudest headlines. So, with that clarity tool in hand, let's get to the heart of what almost nobody in mainstream media is willing to say out loud. Right now, two completely contradictory things can actually be true at the exact same time. And that's exactly why the coverage feels so wildly inconsistent. The first truth? The United States is winning the war in Iran. The second truth? The United States is losing the war in Iran. You might be thinking, wait, how can both of those be real? It only makes sense once you realize this isn't really one single war, it's at least two very different wars happening back to back in the same country. Or, if you prefer the cleaner political language, it's two distinct phases of the same conflict. Either way, the conclusion is identical. The United States right now is fighting two completely different kinds of warfare in Iran. One of them, we're unbelievably, almost scarily good at. The other, we have a long, painful history of being very, very bad at it. Let me break it down. The first type of warfare, what military strategists have nicknamed shock and awe, is pure American excellence. It's about using overwhelming information technology, satellite intelligence, precision strikes, and lightning-fast coordination to locate every conventional military target inside a country and take it offline in a matter of days or weeks. Ballistic missile sites? Gone. Nuclear facilities? Mostly neutralized. Drone production factories? Taken out. The Iranian Navy? Effectively neutralized. And all of that has happened in an astonishingly short window of time, just a couple of weeks. Even if you hate the idea of this war, you have to admit the raw military capability on display here is objectively impressive. We've seen this exact playbook work in Iraq in 2003, in the opening stages of Afghanistan, and in pretty much every modern conventional conflict America has entered. But here's the brutal catch. That dazzling first phase is only war number one. Once you've knocked the regime's military and command structure offline, you immediately enter war number 2, the far messier, far longer phase of trying to create some kind of lasting stability that actually serves American interests. And that's the part the United States has historically failed at, time and time again. The reason I keep switching back and forth between calling these phases of one war and 2 separate wars is actually very intentional, and it has everything to do with a little political game that leaders love to play. I want to call this conflict both things at the same time on purpose. No matter which label you pick, the facts on the ground don't change. But politicians have a habit of twisting the language so they can cherry-pick the glory. When everything goes right, they roll it all into one big, beautiful victory story and take full credit. But the moment things start to drag or fail in the long run, suddenly it becomes 2 different wars. Hey, I nailed War 1, but that messy second part, that's on somebody else. We've already watched this exact trick happen with Iran. 50 years from now, when historians look back at everything unfolding over the past couple of years, they'll almost certainly label the entire saga with one clean name, the US. Iran War, the Israel-Iran War, whatever sticks. But right now, the narrative is already being sliced up for political convenience. The operations last year got branded as the 1-2-day war, and both the United States and Israel quickly declared total victory. Now we're in round 2 of this conflict, and it looks like another victory declaration is coming soon. But here's what almost no one is talking about. After that second victory, there's still a what comes next. And that next part, the nation-building phase, is where America has a terrible track record. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. In every single one of those cases, we crushed the opening conventional fight with shocking speed and power. Then we stumbled hard when it came time to actually build something stable that lasted. In Iran, this isn't optional if you want real long-term success. You can't just smash the current regime's military capabilities and then walk away hoping for the best. You have to create the conditions for a new order that doesn't keep causing the same headaches. And that's exactly where the United States has always come up short. Right now, the Trump administration is still projecting sky-high confidence about that dazzling first phase, the shock and awe knockout. But watch closely. They're already sounding noticeably less certain about what happens after. They know this second war is coming, and they're starting to realize a complete, clean victory might not be in the cards. That's why the framing in the coming weeks is going to be incredibly important. Don't be surprised if, sometime in the next week or 2 or month, the United States and Israel stand up and declare categorical military victory over Iran. The war is over. Check the history books. Add it to the win column. They'll celebrate the fact that Iran's ballistic missiles are gone, its nuclear sites are crippled, its drone factories and navy are offline. And then they'll try to change the channel and pretend the rest doesn't exist. The problem is, while you can choose to ignore the nation-building step, the nation-building step will not choose to ignore you, especially not in a country like Iran. The problem is, while you can choose to ignore the nation-building step, the nation-building step will not choose to ignore you, especially not in a country like Iran. And right now we're already seeing the first cracks in that plan. The Trump administration is suddenly very worried about something they were brushing off just days ago, the Strait of Hormuz. Remember how last week they were telling everyone, don't come steal our glory, we've already won? Now they're publicly yelling at the UK, NATO, and even China to hurry up and send naval support to keep that critical waterway open. That 180-degree flip tells you everything. They're starting to realize this could become a much bigger headache than they originally sold to the American people. I've covered the Strait of Hormuz in previous videos, so I won't rehash every detail, but here's the bottom line. It's not going to be the total economic apocalypse some fearmongers are predicting, but it's also not going to be zero problem. And that middle ground reality is exactly what keeps the White House up at night. Even a steady trickle of disruption over months or years will dominate headlines, tank approval ratings, and make the Trump administration look like they lit the fuse on a crisis they couldn't fully control. So why are they suddenly so concerned that Iran can still apply serious pressure on the Strait? It comes down to one word: drones. Specifically, the tens of thousands of Shahed drones that Iran has scattered and hidden across its entire territory. These things are cheap, relatively simple to operate, and incredibly hard to hunt down completely. The US has claimed they've already destroyed something like 90% of those stockpiles. But look at the fine print that claim doesn't hold up under scrutiny. What we've actually seen is a sharp drop in active drone attacks. That doesn't automatically mean the stockpiles are gone. It could simply mean the Iranians are being smart and holding many of them back. Why? Because they're saving those drones for a long-game strategy, using them to harass shipping in the Strait of Hormuz over an extended period of time, 1 or 2 strikes at a time, week after week. You can't just bomb that threat away with the same shock and awe tactics that worked on the big military bases. These drones are small, mobile, and hidden in a country that gives them every possible advantage. And that brings us to the second reason Iran is so much harder than Iraq or Afghanistan ever were: sheer geography and scale. Iran is a massive country, rugged, mountainous, full of caves and natural hiding spots that were practically made for storing weapons. Even if you level every known factory, the stockpiles can be distributed literally anywhere across thousands of square miles. On top of that, Iran has a lifeline that neither Iraq nor Afghanistan ever enjoyed: direct access to Russia through the Caspian Sea. That waterway lets them move bulk shipments of parts, fuel, and replacement components without ever crossing waters where the U.S. Navy can easily operate. Russia is stretched thin with its own war, sure, but the connection still exists, and it makes the long-term resupply problem far worse than anything we faced in the previous conflicts we already couldn't win. But geography is only half the story. The human factor is even more daunting. Iran has roughly 90 million people, and unlike the fractured societies we dealt with before, it is a genuinely cohesive nation-state with a strong central government that actually exercises real control over most of the territory. Now, not every single one of those 90 million people is loyal to the current regime, far from it. We've all seen the protests that erupted earlier this year, and those images of Iranians in the streets chanting against their leaders were powerful. There's a real chance that some of those voices could rise up and create internal pressure. But here's the uncomfortable truth that a lot of commentators are glossing over: the US and Israeli strikes may actually be making the regime stronger in the eyes of many ordinary Iranians, not weaker. For decades, the Iranian government's entire pitch to its people has been simple: yes, life here is tough. Yes, the rules are strict. But we are the only thing standing between you and the ruthless enemies of America and Israel. That narrative was their main source of legitimacy. Now, with American bombs falling again, a lot of Iranians, even those who weren't huge fans of the regime, are feeling that warning was proven true. Inside Iran, where information is tightly controlled, many people aren't seeing the full picture of how badly the military is struggling. Instead, they're seeing their country under attack by the world superpower, and that actually validates the regime's story in real time. From a psychological and sociological standpoint, this is exactly what experts would have predicted. External threats have a way of rallying people around the flag, even a flag they don't fully love. So while we might hope for massive internal collapse, the data so far suggests the opposite. Loyalty is hardening in many communities. That massive, centralized population creates problems the US never faced at this scale in Iraq or Afghanistan. Iraq fractured into civil war the moment the central government was hit. Afghanistan was never truly centralized to begin with. But Iran? It's different. There aren't ready-made factions sitting there waiting for us to arm them and flip the script. We'd have to build an opposition movement from the ground up, and that takes time, resources, and luck we may not have. Even worse, this centralized strength turns Iran into something far more dangerous than just a hiding place for terrorists. Many analysts, myself included, argue that the Iranian government itself functions as a state sponsor of terror, and it has spent decades building a web of proxy groups across the Middle East and beyond. Those organized proxy networks have indeed been weakened in recent years, which is a genuine win. But the kind of sporadic, lone wolf, or small cell terror attacks, those are likely to increase, not decrease. Why? Because military action like this radicalizes people. It gives them a new reason to act. And the people who are willing to carry out suicide-style attacks or drone harassment aren't the ones who get scared off by shock and awe. They're the ones who feel validated by it. The United States has potentially created a much larger long-term terrorism problem if it doesn't see this conflict through to the very end. And I'm not saying this to scare anyone. I'm simply laying out the hard lessons we all agreed on after Iraq and Afghanistan, lessons that apply directly here. Sometimes the very actions we take to solve a threat end up making the deeper problems worse. The United States is facing a real dilemma right now. If they want to declare victory with a limited scope, the kind where we say we've taken out Iran's ballistic missiles, crippled their nuclear ambitions, neutralized most of their drone stockpiles, and sunk their navy, they can absolutely do that. The Trump administration has already made it clear they have zero interest in getting sucked into the full nation-building nightmare, because they know, deep down, it's a war America has never been able to win the way we won the opening round. But here's the cold, hard truth that almost nobody in Washington wants to say out loud. You can choose to ignore the Second War all you want, but the Second War will not choose to ignore you. So what does that actually look like in practice? You'll probably see a steady stream of drone attacks on commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, not enough to crash the global economy overnight, but enough to keep the headlines screaming for months or even years. You'll see an increase in sporadic, harder-to-predict terror incidents, the kind that don't need a giant proxy army anymore. And the Trump administration is going to have to deal with all of it while pretending the mission is complete. The only other option on the table is the one nobody wants to touch, putting boots on the ground in Iran at massive scale. We're talking millions of troops, a generational commitment, and a price tag that would make Iraq and Afghanistan look cheap. And even if we tried, the odds of long-term success are slim at best. Worse still, if China watches America and NATO get completely tied down in another endless Middle East quagmire, they'll smell weakness from a mile away and start moving aggressively in their own backyard, moves that could shake the global order far more than anything Iran was doing. So here's what's almost certainly going to happen. The United States is going to declare a clean, decisive military victory in that first war, chalk it up in the history books, and then quietly pretend the Second War doesn't exist. But by refusing to fight the Second War, they are, in effect, admitting they've already lost it. The Iran problem isn't going away, it's just changing shape. It's going to fester. It could even get worse in many ways. And no amount of victory parades will change that reality. Now, look, these aren't my only thoughts on this war. There are some real geopolitical upsides here too, especially the way this conflict is quietly weakening China in ways most people haven't noticed yet. I'm actually saving all of that for a full separate video because I don't want to rush it, and I know a lot of you want the complete picture. This war is far more complex than the Trump administration is telling us, and way more complex than most of the media, whether they love him or hate him, is willing to explain. One side only wants to talk about the dazzling First War victory. The other side only wants to talk about the inevitable Second War loss. Almost nobody is trying to show you both at the same time. And that's exactly why I made this video. If you appreciated hearing the unfiltered truth instead of the spin, do me a huge favor, smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, And drop a comment letting me know what you think is going to happen next in Iran. I read every single one. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. Keep your eyes peeled for part 2. I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp out there.